It's the 4th day of September 2022. And Dana Durnford, you can call in at 709-589-4406. Somebody will probably put it in the comments section, maybe. It'd be appreciated. So we're going to start off with the World Economic Forum story from Canada. Canadians have been told not to worry about the World Economic Forum. In other words, stop looking at us. That's an absurd statement. I've never... It'd be like the Bilderberg group telling you you got better things to do than looking at them. So, Sizewell C is over to your left, a new nuclear power plant. They're going to be building Francis, because Britain can't do it. And it's surrounded by farms. You got possible releases going on in Ukraine. By the way, there's always releases at these plants. The fuel pools are still splitting the atoms. And these are huge facilities. Around 9,000 people work at that site each day. It's surrounded by farms. This is a pattern we're looking at over a decade now. Another pattern is the media likes to tell you that man-made anthropogenic radiation, aka dirty bombs, terrorists, if they have an accident, though, it's like a banana in sunshine and walking on an airplane. There's quite a disparage in these stories. We never had the parts show up from Amazon. That's pretty disappointing, too. We had great weather. I have to go out and risk my life. World Economic Forum officials says Canada has bigger issues to discuss than conspiracy theories. That's an interesting statement and way of framing it. This is CBC Canada, which is the Canadian government's tabloid. They call it a media, but it's not actually a media. Adrian here is the director of the World Economic Forum. We're going to explain who the World Economic Forum. You've probably heard me mention it quite a lot over the years. They're shakers and movers, these guys. They don't just have $5,000 ties, they have $5,000 underwear too. They have so much money they just don't know what to do with. That's what being super evil gets you, apparently. So he responds to criticism, disinformation campaigns targeting the World Economic Forum. There's a politician running for prime minister in Canada. It says if he's elected prime minister, he's not going to allow the cabinet and politicians to go to the World Economic Forum. So this is not your average conversation, is it? I'm going to play some clips of these people coming up because they're making claims here that they had already addressed, and so there's a big disparage in what they're saying here and what they actually says on video. Disinformation campaigns. It says the World Economic Forum is where they have young global leaders section, which was Vladimir Putin, Justin Trudeau, Angela Merkel, Macron in France. It's quite a handful there, isn't it? for the exchange of ideas, which is not what they actually said. They can shape the future, is what they claim. And they do that by slaves known as politicians, apparently. A senior official with the World Economic Forum says Canada should be talking about more important things. Again, use the words, the connotations of, well, not connotations, but the actual words conspiracy theories targeting his organization, which he can't defend, unfortunately. He's the manager, Adrian's the managing director of the World Economic Forum, which is supposed to be basically a giant think tank of key people in the military-industrial complex, pharmaceutical industries, government, ex-government agency politicians. Also argued that politicians espousing those that they still haven't told you, the conspiracy theories, should ask themselves whether they're spreading disinformation. That sounds like a threat, don't it? Coming from bad actors. And framing is everything with these people. You got lots of news. This is actually important, so we're going to cover it. Bad actors. Bad actors. Our current Prime Minister 8 years ago in Canada anytime you're ready, Dana.
For any slip, he was asked which country he most admired and referred to China.
There's a level of admiration I actually have for China because their basic dictatorship is allowing them to actually turn their economy around on a dime.
This is an amazing statement, yet he was elected Prime Minister. His daddy was a Prime Minister. He enacted martial law because of protesters. And I'm laughing, but that's the gallows laugh. Somebody would actually do that. His father had done it, I think it was in the 70s. He was the only other Prime Minister actually done something like that, where they seized people's bank accounts for being protesters. Quite a few countries spoke out about him. I'll play a couple of those clips too. It shouldn't really be talking about the World Economic Forum, but why not? Why are you off limits? He told a CBC radio house in an interview Saturday here in Canada, there are bigger issues really for it to be thinking about. In the course of the global coronavirus pandemic, the scamdemic, the World Economic Forum has become a popular target for conspiracy theories. Bear with me. It began with an opinion article published in 2016 on the World Economic Forum's website entitled, "Welcome to 2030. I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better." Well, that's not a conspiracy theory if you had it on your website. I own nothing. I have no property. Welcome to 2030. After the founder and chairman, the guy who founded this organization, he's as creepy as they get. We'll play videos of him. Klaus Schwab wrote his own opinion piece. Well, he's the founder. It's not his own opinion piece. It's the organization. He's the founder. You can't split that hair arguing for something he called a great reset. Well, he did on video. These opinion pieces, which are not, represent two of a number of diverse viewpoints that World Economic Forum's commissions. They got commissions and publishes it, which is all of a sudden they're on what? These opinion pieces represents two of a number of diverse viewpoints The Great Reset has since morphed into a conspiracy theory claiming a cabal of global elitists planning to remake society to eliminate private property and impose an authoritarian global governance, which is the UN. Right? All of this they're talking about is UN, which is 195 militaries. But they're the puppet masters for certain repressive ideas now about the future that have come to fruition. The idea was that we should also try and suggest to people they think about spending it on the kind of long-term things would aid climate change combating. So just focus on skills for climate change. And of course, climate change is decades and decades of radioactive fallout accelerated by Fukushima. The bottom plume is 19 days. It's an invisible plume covering the entire planet and pulses energy every second almost at the speed of light for millions of years to come. It's assimilated into all the trees and plants also. It's pulsing energy, and research that we're doing is showing spiders can't attach to trees and bushes anymore in certain parts of Canada due to Fukushima's radioactive fallout. You're finding them on buildings and houses and vehicles and shovels and man-made structure that's sucking up radiation. But you're not going to find them in the woods in British Columbia or on the East Coast. It's confirmed 3 years now. But you're also missing all the species. Because normally we check the spider webs for all the species that are in that area. Can't check them when they don't tie on the trees anymore. Some conservative MPs have been accused of spreading World Economic Forum's conspiracy theories after, we're going to play that video, after conservative MP Colin Currie told the House of Commons in February that World Economic Forum has penetrated more than half of the Canadian cabinet, folks, was accused of spreading disinformation. And so we'll play that video, and we'll play what Klaus had actually said. We got like 5 clips coming up.
Contact questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Oshawa.
Now, this is the Canadian House of Parliament. And like the video, the audio kind of breaks a little tiny bit, but not enough for it to be what he's going to claim.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I listened to my colleague's speech. I had a constituent that wanted me to ask a question about outside interference to our democracy. Klaus Schwab is the head of the World Economic Forum, and he bragged how his subversive WEF, World Economic Forum, has, quoted, infiltrated governments around the world. He said that his organization had penetrated more than half of Canada's cabinet. And I was wondering, in the interest of transparency, could the member please name which cabinet ministers are on board with the WEF's agenda? My concern is the deputy.
Order. I know that the member was in a really good question there, but the audio is really bad, and the video is really bad as well. And I apologize. I don't know if the member. Okay, let's try again. The honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Mr. Speaker, that member was promoting open disinformation. That's not debate. We have to call out disinformation.
We'll get into debate again.
So they were going to get him to say it again, and the other minister cut him off and called it conspiracy theories. He claimed it was bad audio, bad video. Of course, there was nothing wrong with it. And people took notice of that. But they didn't appreciate the rest of the equation. So I'm going to play a clip of Klaus Schwab. Is that how you pronounce that?
when I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, is that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's true in Argentina as well.
It's true in Argentina.
Wow. So half of Canadian cabinets has been to their meetings and are bought into it. That's a stunning statement. And he starts off with Vladimir Putin, Angela Merkel, Justin Trudeau. We're all young global leaders with the World Economic Forum. They bring them there when they're young, and they groom them for the rest of their young adulthood, and then they put them in positions of authority if they're players, right? And this is what we're seeing running the planet right now. She's one of the people that went there and is on board. She says there is no influence. I went to Davos. The World Economic Forum is not running Canada. But half the Canadian government went there. It wasn't just you. Here's a major statement.
But now, I think with you, together with our constituents, Prime Minister, we can make sure that in the future we strengthen the cooperation even more with your country. Prime Minister, we are very much looking forward to listen to you, and actually the discussion will be moderated by my friend Farid. So we will have some exciting, interesting moments. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And then the guy who still sat down, he's been around, haven't he? Farid. You see him do key speeches at Harvard, Yale, Stanford over the years. Now she says that she went there and they're not influencing the government. So why is half of the government going there if they're not influencing them? Obviously. Because they're bored. And who's paying for it again? Oh, that's right, the Canadian taxpayers. That during the pandemic, the World Economic Forum became aware. Now, he's just that single man started up that whole organization and is the key speaker, the runner of it. He doesn't have personal opinions. It's like me. I don't have a personal opinion outside of what I'm telling you in these programs. You know what I mean? It's absurd to suggest that I'm telling you something different than what I believe. But that's normal. We show you that all the time, how that is actually normal, right? They're doing it actually in the... During the pandemic, the World Economic Forum became aware that it was being targeted by state-sponsored, Canadian-sponsored disinformation campaigns to discredit them. Yeah, because half of the government, the major political leaders in government, are ascribed to whatever. They don't tell us 100% what they're.
Thank you. Based on Article 195, out that
this is European Parliament. There's two of these clips I'm going to play, taking a shit on our Prime Minister from Canada for what he done by imposing martial law against everybody in Canada. The whole country, because protesters in Ottawa were protesting the vaccine.
it would have been more appropriate for Mr. Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, to address this House according to Article 144, an article which was specifically designed to debate violations of human rights, democracy and the rule of law, which is clearly the case with Mr. Trudeau. Then again, a Prime Minister who openly admires the Chinese basic dictatorship, who tramples on fundamental rights by persecuting and criminalizing his own citizens as terrorists just because they dared to stand up to his perverted concept of democracy, should not be allowed to speak in this House at all. Mr. Trudeau, you are a disgrace for any democracy. Please spare us your presence. Thank you.
And another politician in the European Parliament.
And with the Prime Minister of Canada, the way he's behaving right now, he's exactly like a tyrant, like a dictator. He's like Ceausescu in Romania. If even you doubt, if you raise doubts about the vaccines, you're outcasted. What's the difference between what he does and what happened under the Inquisition? See, on one side they say, well, we should not believe in God, but on the other side they say, believe in science. We don't have to. Science is not about belief. Science is about measurements, conclusions, hypotheses and arguments. We got to a point right now where even if you say something, if you raise any doubts, you're already considered, as whatever, they label you in very different ways.
Subversive.
This is not okay. And I have to tell you, that when I saw the protests in Canada, the way the truckers over there reacted, I got in touch with some of them, others contacted me, I congratulated them, and I want to use this opportunity to thank them. And I hope this movement for freedom and for rights is spreading all around the world. Because at the end of the day, we have to make sure that all these elected officials, they understand that they were elected in those offices to work for the people, not to behave like masters of slaves. Thank you.
Well said. He said the false conspiracy theories about the World Economic Forum pursuing a new world order, which is, again, that's a quote, he's referring to United Nations. And then, as you notice, there's no country can do anything without United Nations, without kissing their ring, getting on one knee and kissing the ring. Here's what George Bush Sr. said about United Nations. He calls them the New World Order. He said the false conspiracy theories were about them pursuing the United Nations agenda. Or are they shaping the United Nations agenda?
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
UN is the New World Order, folks. So that's what they were referring to. We've seen that earlier, right? Barrels is now, so now they got to bring out the anti-Semitic slander, right? Because a lot of people conscribe to that right away, and so they disregard it. Structure from an old anti-Semitic claim about a Jewish plan for global domination. A Jewish plan for a global... Well, the Bible says only the Jews will get into heaven. Right? But not just any Jew. It's got to be the Orthodox Jew, right? But only the Jews that are in Jerusalem, which was Palestine's capital for 300 years or something, was it? And because it's in the Bible, they created 5 million refugees, mostly the adults, and there's 10,000 Taliban, which is obviously, you got to have a boogeyman, right? I'm not going to go down that road, but just remind you what this anti-Semitic is all about. Right? Ultimately, it goes back to the Bible and Jerusalem. I got at the end of this, I got 2 clips. Will tell you the story of what's really going on. Canada's one of the places where there's a vulnerability to disinformation. It's an open society. Poor Canada, open society, bastards. And that particular strand of disinformation went into the mainstream. The controlled mainstream, you think it's just going to wiggle in there and become part of the... Give me a break. I admire anyone who makes the decision to devote their lives to the public life, Cookies claims. It's not an easy road, and I do think politicians of every single stamp need to look very hard at the language that they use when some of this stuff comes from, and where some of this stuff... And if it's coming from a space of disinformation, and in particular anti-Semitism, which is a crime in some countries, right? You can go to jail, but it's not a crime to apply that to the Palestinians. It's only a crime to apply it to the Jews. It doesn't apply to everybody, right? Still, the forum has drawn some strong political criticism. Surprise? Really? You said it's a forum where you have open debates. So criticism, debate is now criticism when it comes to the economic forum. Last week, the Conservative leadership candidate, Pierre, and I'm going to butcher the last name, told a crowd of applauding supporters the Prime Minister would ban cabinet ministers from attending that big fancy conference of billionaires with the World Economic Forums and vowed to remove them from cabinet should they attend. And they'll show a Twitter, I think, of that. So they have a little link there. Listen to the World Economic Forum's Adrian Monck speak to the House. He's got no influence at all. They all go there, but he can come there and talk to the entire House, including the people that didn't go to the World Economic Forum, which was half the cabinet, according to the founder. They hold the conference in Davos, Switzerland, every January with how many thousands of police and militaries, where business leaders to protect them and politicians from around the world will gather. Where businesses, leaders, and politicians from around the world gather. Both Prime Minister Trudeau and former Prime Minister Stephen Degenerate Harper covered up Fukushima and allowed the food to come into the country after 93 days when it was banned by 55 countries and 14 prefectures for a decade. So they couldn't ship it anywhere, only to Canada. And everybody's in Canada sick because of what Stephen Harper let happen, who endorsed Poilievre, I guess I'll butcher the name for something to do, for the Conservative leadership had attended the conference twice and realized, I guess, they were evil, right? Harper, in 2012, gave a speech describing the World Economic Forum as an indispensable part of the global conversation among leaders in politics, business, and civil society, which is under Canadian Bill of Rights is sedition to go meet outside the country and in secret with other leaders. That's actually sedition. And said that in the face of continuing global economic instability, the opportunity these gatherings provides now more valuable than ever. The slippery, slimy, despicable mass murderer who betrayed all Canadians says, by shipping in food from a nuclear wasteland after 93 freaking days. Well, it was still a massive meltdown mode, which it still is, by the way. If we ever get to it. We don't stand for big, small, middle-sized governments. We deal with governments of every single Minutia of the detail of the detail. Here's the founder again.
It's the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, half of this cabinet, are actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
And half of his academy, of his half of the parliament. Politicians should consider whether these theories are coming from before espousing them. Well, it was the leader himself, isn't it? There's truth with the World Economic Forum on top of that.
We penetrate the cabinets.
We penetrate the cabinet. What do you think he's saying?
We penetrate the cabinets.
Like, do you get what he's doing there? We penetrate the cabinet. That's some spooky friggin' shit right there, baby.
We penetrate the cabinets.
He said, I don't prescribe policies, but act as a forum for exchanging idea. Listen, you didn't invite them all there to have fucking tea and biscuits. You invited them there to influence them. You want to influence them because you're bored or because you got an agenda? Let me explain how to you. When people like that get together and decide they want to accomplish something, it's typically above the imagination of the average person. But this man here, I will explain to you something unique about the histories of war and how we actually got the war.
I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran.
It's hard to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. That's a messed up statement, no matter how you look at it.
Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall he had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war.
So it would be best, he starts off with, it's hard to imagine how this president is going to get us to war with Iran, so it'd be best if somebody else starts the war. And he showed you a bunch of examples of exactly that. That, folks, that is what he's talking about. The change can be shaped.
The change is not just happening. The change can be shaped by us.
We have to prepare for a more angry world. How to prepare? Takes the necessary action to create a fairer world. I see the need for a great reset.
So people assume we are just going back to the good old world which we had and everything will be normal again. This is, let's say, fiction. It will not happen.
There is only one way this pandemic is going to go. It's going to get worse and worse and worse.
The next crisis is already waiting for us around the corner, and it is the climate crisis.
The climate crisis is 80 years of man-made anthropogenic radiation released into the environment in plumes that you can't see it and you can't smell it, you can't touch it, you can't hear it, you can't feel it, you can't pick it up, can't throw rocks at it, you can't get rid of it, you can't incinerate it, you can't destroy it, you can't put it in acid and kill it, you can't destroyed at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures. In incinerators is liberated back into the environment, whereas pulsing energy, imagine in 16-day period, a snowstorm covers the whole planet and snows every day for 1 million years. So look at the opposite, where an invisible snowstorm of energy circles the entire planet, pulsing energy almost at the speed of light. Do you got any idea how much energy it takes to make something move almost at the speed of light? Every second. And how prolific the amount we're actually talking about is. If you hang around, you'll actually wrap your mind around that coming up a little short bit later. Now charging joint batteries to power cities. Joint batteries to power cities. Because it's far-fetched, right? And therefore the only thing that can fill in the gap is nuclear, basically, right? Because we hear this all the time. Giant batteries that'll power cities. It's just madness to even suggest we're going to use batteries to power cities. I'll show you what you can use. Basically, the best one is geothermal. You just, any oil, gas, coal plant, drill straight down, tap into geothermal, get rid of the gas, oil, and coal. If you want to do it, you'll do it. It's cheaper than spending $10 billion on a new one. As the world faces the power, you can dig so deep naturally, and then you use lasers to drill the rest. You hit 1,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. There's no danger. And now you got 1,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures for 1 million years at your fingertips. You can just leave all the infrastructure there, get rid of the gas, oil, and coal. Nuclear. As the world faces but compressed air storage and water batteries. It's coming up, I'll show it to you. As the world faces a power crisis, climate catastrophe, which is unequivocally caused by Fukushima, it's irrelevant what or who caused it in the context of it's real. And it's real because it's an extinction level event, as the research shows. If you look at my last video, you'll wrap your mind around that in the first few minutes. As the world faces a power crisis and climate catastrophe, giant batteries become a necessity, writes Satchin, blah, blah, blah. As you discover, simple solutions are already being rolled out. The key solution to global power shortage is a device meant to store huge quantities of energy in some form, as your battery does chemically in your gadgets. Big batteries are expensive, uses precious metals, and too expensive, environmentally unfriendly, blah, 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 flammable and everything else to justify. But we cover this all the time, and we're well used to these narratives. The other reason for needing big batteries, again, this is nonsense, because you can just dig mine shafts and compress air down there with extra energy. Coal is polluting. Coal's fine, just don't build it in your communities. Coal emissions, gas emissions, oil emissions don't cover the planet in plumes in 16 days pulsing energy for millions of years. You don't typically travel more than 50 or 100 miles, and we're able to transmit power a lot further, so why build them in your cities? Well, if you got nuclear and coal in your city, well, first off, all nuke plants use gas, oil, and coal plants, at least 2 of them, the big ones, to run the nuclear facility, to build it, to run its lifespan, and for 60 years to decommission it. They can't run on their own power. Coal is polluting. Chernobyl, Fukushima, the crisis developing in Ukraine proves how dangerous nuclear can be. The problem with solar, there's no sun at night, and with wind, it's not always windy. This is an argument we hear multiple times each day. When you can have water batteries where you build 2 reservoirs, you fill them up, and then when you get excess energy, you pump water up. When you need it, water comes down. And that's your 6-8 hour peak loads on top of that, right? It's a garbage can diagnosis to say that there's no solutions. According to International Energy Agency, we need 10,000 gigawatts of storage by 2040 to meet climate goals. Again, right? You got climate change now is being accelerated also by 1,000 plus fuel pools worldwide that are still splitting atoms. So reactor cores are put in fuel pools, and fuel pools have multiple reactor cores, and the reactor cores normally powered 1 million homes. They don't do that no more, but they're still splitting the atoms for 1 million homes. They're vented out tall, skinny stacks of nuclear plants and other ways, right? Because they're still splitting the atom. Each pool is burning off at least 120,000 liters a day. It's saturated. Each liter is trillions of man-made anthropogenic isotopes. They're liberating to the environment, and now they're pulsing energy in the environment forever and ever. So each day you have this massive inventory being released into the environment. You can't perceive it. And you can't see it or smell it or taste it. But let's make no mistake, this is what's happening. This is not an opinion. This is not a conjecture. Pumped hydroelectric storage, we had just talked about, moving water between 2 reservoirs. And so tidal energy, so geothermal and tidal energy is what you should use first. And they decided that's too hard. Yeah, we can build engines flying planes for 50, 60 years, high up in the sky at 500 and 600 miles per hour, no problem. But we can't take that technology and just generate energy at low speed. It's an absurd suggestion, folks. It's a ridiculous suggestion. By the way, if you put your windmills on the mountains where the wind blows all the time, you would have 24-hour windmill energy. But you use tidal and geothermal, they're 24 hours a day, predictable for thousands of years, and then back that up with wind and solar, and back that up with compressed air storage, mine shafts, compressed to 120 psi, reclaim the heat and store it in salt. You can hold it for 2 weeks and unpack it when you want to, you need energy, right? You use the same heat that you would normally have wasted, you can now store it up to 500 degrees in salt easily for 2 weeks. This is invaluable in filling gaps in solar and wind. Excess power created by solar and windmills can be used to draw the water into the upper reservoir. At night, during times of low wind, blah, 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 the water is released back down. And sand batteries is another one, right? Huge, easy to do with just junk sand, so-called. They'll store energy at around 500 degrees Celsius for months. Sand batteries. And they're building them, right? 100 tons of discharged sand. Iron air batteries is a bizarre one, but it's a doable battery, apparently. And sodium ion batteries, you don't need them. Batteries for cities. There's other ways to store it that are being used or got the kinks out of it, are obsolete technologies that if you took 100 universities or 1,000 universities and made it better, you could right away within 2 weeks. You can solve any problem if you threw 1,000 universities at it on top of that. Have a contest in 1,000 universities to solve the riddle in your spare time. You really think we're not going to come up with a solution? Is there anybody really that gullible thinks we won't come up with a solution if we try? Let's keep it rolling here. California lawmakers extend the life of the state's... Now, this was a concerted effort. PG&E runs it, didn't even want to extend it. They were throwing money at them. They didn't want the money. The place is a nightmare, which is Diablo Canyon. A startling amount released from Diablo Canyon in 2014. They consider it significant, comparable, which is ludicrous to suggest it's as bad as Fukushima, but obviously it was a disaster, right? You can't have these places don't hold a disaster worth of tritium. In order to have a disaster like that, you would have had to have a big release of uranium, plutonium, americium, neptunium, strontium, and 1,000 other fission products. So he passed. Now, this wasn't even going to close down for another 3 years. So if they wanted to replace it with renewables, they had 3 years to do it. They knew this 3-year limit was coming 30 years ago. They could have been prepared. This is what most responsible agencies would have done. They should have all been fired for not implementing something. They have the monetary, the authority, they have the skill, they have the resources, they have the consent. They didn't do it. So there's nothing to replace it. Well, we got to keep using nuclear. Well, we got 3 years. We can replace it in 3 years. No. Well, let's just throw the money at this hole in the ground, these disease factories that are hemorrhaging radiation all the time. Okay, so you're going to keep it for another 5 years. Then what's your solution? Because they're not saying, well, that'll give us 8 years so we can have blah, 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 blah in place at that stage. Well, but you have an accident in that time frame. What's going to replace it then? So this was environmental progress, basically. And so they mention Isabelle, which is a model from Brazil, who was recruited by Environmental Progress, Michael Schellenberg. And if you ever read any of his stuff, he's a nuclear lobbyist. He's not supposed to be in the equation because he's a dishonest, disingenuous, deceitful, and deceptive creature. So they got this model, isotope or something. All she's doing is regurgitating whatever on the list, right? She does a little TikTok video for 30 seconds, and the media will pump it out there. It's despicable, really. It's still not signed into law, but it probably will be. Typhoon hitting at 145 miles per hour. And they don't have any infrastructure there for that kind of wind, by the way. 234 kilometers per hour in Japan. It's 145 miles per hour and gusting to 190 probably, right? So if you go look up that spot, there's all kinds of communities that don't have any infrastructure. And they're not actually in Japan. They're part of Japan or something, but they're not actually in Japan. Yeah, they're part of Japan, but they're not actually in the main archipelagos of islands. In the following 24 hours, there's 200 to 300 millimeters of rainfall. That's going to wash a lot of radiation back into the ocean. Oh, that's in the wrong spot, and my apologies. I must have forgot about it. Yeah, let's go back to that story for a minute, I guess. Yeah, he said, look, I will ban ministers and other top officials from involvement with the World Economic Forum. It's up on his Twitter account doing a public speech. So good on him. Ukraine nuke plant partly goes offline. Partly goes offline. They only got one reactor working there now. Desperate to have a meltdown. Look at all the farmland in the background, for God's sakes. The head of UN, Rafael Grossi, is a despicable little tiny creature, isn't he? He's a despicable little creature. We covered him since he replaced the zombie that died. Which I celebrated for 2 days after the last guy died. That's how it tells you my respect I have for these scumbags. Which is United Nations, scumbags. Was disconnected to its last external power line. So this is kind of a tongue twister what they done here. I think this was CBC, I can't remember. The head of the UN nuclear watchdog said that Russia-controlled nuke plant in Ukraine was disconnected to its last external power line. Now, a nuke plant needs external power to run. Its pumps needs 1 million gallons per minute per reactor. That's 4,500 tons a minute. That's 4,500 pickup trucks a minute of water. Big ones. We're still able to run electricity through a reserve line amid sustained shelling in the area. We're still able to run electricity. So I'm confused now. If it lost its external power, it's supposed to go into shutdown mode automatically, right? And so if it's putting out power, that's not the same as the power that's coming in. It needs power to run the site from external. It produces electricity and sends it out through all the capacitors and voltage regulators and everything else and feeds that out into the grid. They're two completely different entities. One is meant to run all the reactors and pumps and the site itself. The other one is supplying it to the communities. It can't supply the electricity back to itself. It has it's supposed to have two external power plants just in case one goes down, right? That are dedicated to it 24 hours a day. So there's no interruption. The fourth and last operating line was down. The 3 others were lost earlier during the conflict last week, right? How hard would it be to say that, I wonder? But the IAEA experts learned that the reserve line linking the facility to a nearby thermal power plant. Well, the nearby thermal power plant is running power to them. They don't run power to that plant. The IAEA experts, the International Atomic Energy Agency, aka United Nations, which has a whole bunch of these agencies in order to creep in every facet of your country. They don't have any sovereignty over your country. This entity known as United Nations, they're a global corporation with 195 militaries subscribed to them. Just like Klaus Schwab got all kinds of leaders subscribed to him, it's the same thing, right? That support them, donate to them, give them freedom of movement in their countries when they're not entitled to it. Linking, that the reserve line linking the facility to a nearby thermal power plant was delivering electricity the plant generates to the external grid. Again, none of that actually makes sense. Because if you lose external power, your generator is going to come on, which typically needed external power, by the way. But there is such a thing as a generator to fire up those generators. Once they start up the backup generator, that's not to run the power plant. That's to help shut it down. It has to shut down. It's not going to keep pumping out electricity while it's running on the external. While it was running on the external power. Bear with me. Not paying attention. I over-clicked. I'll get there. Oh, there we go. We got some great stuff coming up here. Looking for something familiar. Screwed up. Here we go. We already have a better understanding of functionality. The reserve power line is connecting the facility to the grid. This is a really strange statement. Why are they they had a shell disconnect the fort line that powers the site. And they're going to this very mysterious, confusing narrative that has nothing to do with the story. Another reactor still operating, producing electricity, both for... Now, this doesn't work that way. You can't run on your own plant. Cooling and other essential safety functions at the site. The reactor doesn't run the site. That's a complete... Now, why would you say that? Because they lost external power. They're running it on the generator. And they don't want to say something like that. Not well, why would you claim? Why would you frame the narrative the way they just tried to frame it? Where it's confusing even to me, for goodness sakes. Another reactor still operating, producing electricity for cooling and other essential safety functions at the site. No, a generator is operating, producing electricity for cooling and other essential safety functions at the site. The generator, not another reactor. And this story wasn't written by a journalist. This was written by the industry. This is way too complicated for the journalist to comprehend. The whole story, when you read it, a shell has struck an area between two reactors. Oh, really? Really? So they destroyed. There's something happened there. It has repeatedly suffered complete disconnection from Ukraine power grid since last week, with the country's nuclear energy operator blaming mortar shells and fire near the site, right, that burnt down the lines in a war zone. And you're not going to be connecting them back up anytime soon. So the risk of a radioactive leak is scary. So it looks like they had an event there, and they just pretending that everything is working, because that's what they're actually doing. They're pretending. Pasco, a 31-year-old farmer, said there is anxiety. We are quite close. That's the scariest statement ever. The farmer is close to any nuclear power plant. It's just terrifying. These are mass murderers. Shouldn't you evacuate? You got a war right alongside you. During the first weeks of war, authorities gave iodine tablets and useless masks to people living near the plant in case of radiation exposure. Shelter in the place, get sick and die in increments over a short period of time, or quickly, depending on the plume. You're getting a full body radiation x-rays if you're staying there. They also distribute iodine pills in a major city 31 miles away. You gotta get at least 100 miles away from these things. They're always hemorrhaging radiation, and they're surrounded by farms. So you want to go far away from wherever those farms are going to ship. Russia says it's foiled Ukrainian attempts to seize nuclear plants, and each plant, of course, is hemorrhaging radiation in a 24-hour cycle from the multiple fuel pools at the top of each reactor building. They got 12 fuel pools, all hemorrhaging radiation 24 hours a day. They're releasing over 1 million liters a day from their fuel pools into the environment. Minimum, it might be double that. They still got to run all the fuel pools at the site. Yeah, there's just one reactor running, but they got 12 fuel pools. Even if all the reactors are stopped, they still got to cool those pools. They still need 120,000 liters a day. Russia says it's foiled Ukrainian. Apparently, Ukraine tried to seize the plant with 30 or 40 speedboats, and because you have United Nations was there, they decided to storm the place, and they got smashed by jet fighters and attack helicopters and who knows what else. 250 troops. Most of them got mowed down, apparently. There's 20 Ukrainian vessels and others. Reuters is unable to verify the report. First off, Reuters is a despicable group organization and media. And the fact that they're unable to verify the report in a war zone, is that a shock to anybody? Accusing Russia, who used nuclear terrorism to get their hands on the plant, is accusing Ukraine of committing nuclear terrorism. Partly goes offline, partly. It meant that they lost external power. The generators only running certain parts of the site. That's what they're talking about. Just in time. Well, it wasn't Raphael. I don't think Raphael Grossi himself is gone. He's way too big of a coward to do that, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, he's not there. The fourth and last operational line was down, and 3 others were lost during the conflict. So all 4 external power is gone. Wow. There he is, scumbag himself. The degenerate of degenerates. When he died, the last degenerate, mass murderer Raphael Grossi took over. He's a despicable little creature, isn't he? He's a revolting parasite. Loses a power line again. Power line. They can't connect them. There's a war going on. Everything burnt, right? I showed you the pictures of the... I'll show you again coming up, actually. Raphael, that's him there. He's wanted for sniffing people's bicycle seats in his spare time. Lost connection to a main external power line, but remains connected to a reserve line. There is no reserve line. They went through great detail in all of these articles explaining all 4 lines are gone. There is no reserve line. The 4th operational power line was down, and the 3 others are down. So they're all down. Only one of the reactors is still operating. Well, the generators are not to operate it, they're to shut it down. Continuous shelling of the site. Yeah, let's just keep it running. It's continuous shelling of the site. It's not running. These people are perpetual liars, for goodness sakes. Rather than get a real job, they got to do stuff like this. So 256.46, our last video, 256.46, and when the video was over, it was 256.39, so it's 7 seconds longer. They make my video 7 seconds longer, 6, 7, 8, 9 seconds, 28 seconds sometimes longer, exactly 12 hours after I post my video. It's really weird. I had 64 likes after the show, after the first hour. 22 hours later, I had 67 strikes. Thumbs up. I got 3 thumbs up in 21 hours. Is that good? I forget. It's been a long time. And they made my video longer, and they stopped people from giving me thumbs up. And they stopped the counter, obviously, right? It don't matter. It's show. You got to tell the story, right? So the counter doesn't matter because, you know, you're censored. They're not censoring me because I'm gullible. Europe must stop undermining the International Atomic Energy Agency. Political. Which is United Nations. Saying Europe has to stop undermining them. That's the IAEA Day scumbags there, which is just United Nations itself, really. Nuclear is the worst possible way to back up wind power. Oh, yes, man. My parents drove a VW, and they were dedicated anti-nuclear campaigners. VW got nothing to do with anti-nuclear. Anti-nuclear just means you're pro-life, that's all. Anti-nuclear means you're smarter. Anti-nuclear is a slur, actually, that the industry uses against people who understand they're monsters, who refuse to differentiate between civil and military uses of nuclear. We're doomed either way. I inherited much of the instinct and prejudice against all things nuclear. But the energy equation is altered with climate change, which is caused by nuclear. And many who oppose nuclear power have changed their mind. And for their evidence, they're going to use George Monbiot. Try making that up on your own. Who came out after Fukushima, multiple nuclear meltdowns, and said, look, proves nuclear is awesome, had no damage whatsoever. God bless nuclear. Has reconsidered its use. That should make us all freaking ashamed to be humans, that people actually exist like that. Atomic fission generates 3/4 of the world clean energy. This is madness, eh? To suggest that the most dirty, the most fossil fuel intensive energy on the planet, the most resource, and uses the most precious metal and contaminates it for millions of years, is somehow clean energy. What a kooky, batshit lunatic the nuke industry really is, though. I mean, absolutely batshit lunatic, isn't it? The International Energy Agency, which says by 2026, between 2020 and 2026, there's going to be 4,800 gigawatts of new energy, which is equal to 5,500 full-size nuclear power plants, the animosity equivalent of renewable energies in that 6-year period, which is more than all current gas, oil, coal, nuclear combined on the planet. Do you think that technology is just going to friggin' stop then? Because there's a renaissance, and The industry is very adamant to stop any renewable energies from having storage. That's their number one goal. And so an example of that would be, last year Canada had $4 billion allocated to renewable for storage. Bruce Power, nuclear power, took all $4 billion of the dollars to have pumped hydro for the nuke plants, which don't need it. So that renewable couldn't prove proof of concept. The ultimate in evilness when they done that, folks. That's the ultimate evil, because you denied Canada the ability to do the moral and ethical and proper thing by deceit and deception and harming everybody in the process. Scottish government disagrees, like Germany's busy phasing out nuclear in the next few years, even though it generates 20% of the so-called base load energy. It's just like 6 hours a day peak energy. When the wind doesn't blow. Got to stick that in there, see? I'll show you right away why I'm saying that. When the wind doesn't blow. The short answer is that ugly word baseload. Opponents of nuclear have yet to find a solution to it. And that the wind power is intermittent, it's feast or famine. And so no one has come up with a sensible way of storing all that wind energy. Nobody has come up with a sensible way. Pumped hydro could deliver 100% renewable. They identified 500,000 places, natural, worldwide, where you can pump water up a hill. That's direct water. That's not like two reservoirs. They're called water batteries. This is called pumped hydro. I love the water batteries, just pumping water up, right? The same water over and over. If you use, you put a lot of mineral in the water is much heavier. And compressed air storage. So with extra energy, you pump water up a hill, or you pump it into caverns, mine shafts at low pressure, and then unpack it when the wind's not blowing or the sun's not shining. So if you use both of them, there's many more though, right? But just those two alone will power the city. Right? Instead of pumped hydro, you use water batteries, where the water is used over and over and over. Why not do that? So the claim that there is this is and that's the ultimate insult in that particular framing. We hear this stuff all the time, but that particular framing, that's just a degenerate, whoever wrote that. Right? They actually wrote that. That's a sneer. That's what that is. Company aims to power the world for millions of years by digging the deepest holes ever. Where you just tap into geothermal. Wherever there's a gas, oil, coal, nuke plant, just dig down, tap into geothermal. Because you can dig so far, but that was the problem. Now you can use lasers and dig the rest of the way. And then you get to your temperature you like, and you can get rid of the coal, oil, gas, expendables, and just keep the whole infrastructure intact, right? Indeed, sometimes our wind turbines are turned off because they can't store the energy. Which again, you have solutions that have long existed, but the water batteries is even better than pumped hydro, in my opinion. You don't have the fish mortality, right? But compressed air wind storage, you don't have to worry about any species. Well, theoretically. And then geothermal is the ultimate, isn't it? Now, they got a project, compressed air storage, will provide 400 megawatts for 8 hours for less than $1 billion for 50 years with no toxic substances. But we've seen them do it underwater too, right? So they mentioned Boris Johnson. Why mention that creature for? The despicable scum Boris, the monster Johnson. Never had any doubts about nuclear. Why does he matter? He's not a genius or something. Angela Merkel actually was a genius. She was a quantum physicist, for goodness sakes. Boris is just a politician on the lower forms of the scale. And harnessed with renewables, he sees it as the only credible route, nuclear. Well, that's simply not true. Net zero, which is, when you hear the words net zero, which is Miles Allen wrote a stupid paper, right, to get some points, and then that got weaponized by the World Economic Forum and United Nations, other think tanks like that. Then you got the father of global warming, which is Wallace Brocker, wrote a paper. You had carbon footprint, which was written by BP Oil, was a campaign. Where the hell did that go? My apologies. A campaign written by BP Oil. That I forgot to put there. By BP Oil was a campaign, advertising campaign, to divert attention from BP Oil and blame it on the consumer. And how do you get your carbon footprint down? Oh, yeah, that's right. And then climate change was this creature here, James Hansen, gave a single presentation, 1988, for goodness sakes. And claimed that his testimony was pivotal, turning point in the history of climate change, and started the debate on global warming, climate change policies. Okay, in 1988. All right, so 1988 was just after all the decades of open-air nuclear testing. And the underground tests were all vented to the surface, by the way, folks. So USA, Soviet Union, United Kingdom, France, China, that's a nuclear war. Okay, but so when you look at this, you see, well, 1,000 bombs, 1,000 tests, 1,132 bombs. The USSR fired 980 nuclear weapons, right? UK, 88 nuclear weapons. France, they blew up all the paradises on the planet, like Christmas Island, the Marshall Islands, the French Polynesians. But there's a bigger picture there that you should be looking at when you look at these bombs. So it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around. So I prepared just a small example, hopefully. Me and myself and I. I'm in the wrong place. There we go. So this was a nuclear war. I'll explain it to you. Here's one of the bombs he set off in nuclear war. The sulfur in the salt water creates this phenomenon they knew about back then called sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs. These little spherical balls, they're very mobile. They ingest uranium, plutonium, americium, neptunium, strontiums, everything else, and become super hot particles. And they end up all around the planet. So let's look at some of these individual bombs for a minute. So these are megatons only. The Soviet Union done one was 50 megatons. Well, that's equal to 3,800 Hiroshima bombs going off at the same time. So when you see it says 1,132 bombs, or I'm sorry, 981 for the USSR, remember just a single one of them was equal to 3,800 Hiroshima bombs. In December of, that was a nuclear war they had in 1961, because that's a nuclear war. When you're setting off 3,800 nuclear weapons at the same time, the radioactive fallout, that's the same radioactive fallout as 3,800 Hiroshimas. So in 62, they set off 1,900 Hiroshimas, or 24 megatons. And in August, they set off around 1,700 Hiroshima bombs of 1962. And 1,500 Hiroshima bombs in September, 1,400 Hiroshima bombs in September of 25th. So that's a multiple nuclear wars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 5 nuclear wars you're talking about. So this is what the 50-ton nuclear weapon would have looked like. This model is actually Fukushima melting down over 16 days of fallout. The fallout has never stopped, by the way. But that's exactly what would have happened. Those same plumes would have covered the whole planet, and we know this for sure. Each of those dates, right? They were nuclear wars. September 1962 was around, say, 1,500 Hiroshima bombs. In 1954, there was another war by the U.S. with over 1,500 Hiroshima bombs. And in May, they'd done another war with over almost 1,200 Hiroshima bombs. I'm just guesstimating, right? In 1961, they had a nuclear war with around 1,200 Hiroshima bombs. In 1954, they had another war with around 1,200 Hiroshima bombs at Bikini Atoll called Castle Romeo. In 1952, they had another war. I'm sorry, it's actually around 538. So 800, I can't remember. 800, 8545, no, it's less than that. So say 600 in 1962. They had another war in 58 with 1,000 Hiroshimas, 1,000 Hiroshimas in 58, 1,000 Hiroshimas. But you get where I'm going, right? It's not 1,000, I know, it's like 750, 600. Another, each of these are representing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of nuclear weapons detonating that year. Each of these are nuclear wars. And there was a lot of these nuclear wars in 1961, 1971. Each of these years are nuclear wars. Again in 56 on that date. Each of these dates are nuclear wars. The animosity equivalents. Each of these wars are nuclear wars. Each one of them is another nuclear war. These are smaller nuclear wars. And hang on, I'll do some math for a quick change. And divide, so 10 is 760 nuclear bombs. We'll divide it by 3. So 253 Hiroshima bombs is a 3 kiloton. So these are all a couple of hundred kiloton, which are a couple of hundred Hiroshima bombs, each of them dates going off at the same time, animosity equivalent to radioactive fallout. So 1.8 so 1.8, so 760 per 10 kiloton divided by 1.6. I done that wrong. What was the number we wanted? Oh, well, each one is 76. So, 150 average. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, because Hiroshima was the only uranium bomb they set off. The rest were plutonium bombs. So each of them is equal to 150 nuclear weapons going off on that day. Hiroshima-sized radioactive fallout animosity equivalent. So these 100. So if China and Russia fires 75 Hiroshima bombs at each other, is that a nuclear war? These 15 kiloton nuclear weapons, is that still a nuclear war? Because if it is, then what I'm telling you is true, right? So just to claim that there's only 2,000 bombs set off doesn't do it justice, because just one of them is equal to 380 of the Hiroshima bombs. This is a radioactive dispersal model from Fukushima. It's covering the Pacific, the Atlantic, Europe in just March the 26th, which is 15 days. The plume doesn't stop. Boris Johnson's last act as prime minister was to pony up 700 million public money to persuade France to build Britain's first new reactor since the 80s. Why? As we'll see. So why did they wait so long? Same as France has done, right, in other countries. They waited until it's too late. And then they swore their allegiance to the satanic demon. Boris lifted all restrictions probably 4 weeks ago, I guess now, from Japan's food. There's no checks, no balances, no certificates, no nothing. Just ship it to the United Kingdom. Now, food wasn't just banned in Fukushima prefecture, it was banned in 14 prefectures. But that's why you don't need leaders, is because they could do something like that and did something like that. That's an incredible incentive to actually get rid of people with that kind of authority. That's not the best interest of the United Kingdom to do that. You're poisoning everybody all the time in every meal. Eventually their shelves and refrigerators, particularly those who are on lower wages, who have to spend their check each week, they're immediately vulnerable, the most vulnerable. And that trickle-down effect is not a game. That's the definition of evil. What he done, and same with Canada, Stephen Harper, 93 days after, at least Boris waited over a decade, Harper done it after 93 days. The food is banned by 55 countries and 14 prefectures. still by 15 countries. Like they put people in key positions, or they buy people in key positions and lift the restrictions. It's so evil, it actually defies any kind of reality. The anti-Sizewell campaign against it seemed muted so far. Ben is the menace, said a placard depicting the then Labour government industry secretary who had authorized the building of the plant. Like Boris, he was a nuclear evangelist in bed with Boris. Is an interesting statement, isn't it? The Torness nuke plant is long past its planned lifespan. Will pack up its radioactive rods. It ain't going to pack up its radioactive rods in 2028 or ever. You know, to decommission Donneray, United Kingdom, will take at least 315 years. Who the hell come up to 15 years in that equation? I'll never know. But who's going to be around to find out if they're right or wrong? And there's going to be hemorrhaging radiation for 300 years in Scotland now, isn't it? Pack up its radioactive rod. I just want to slap anybody that says stuff like that. You can't pack up radioactive rods. You can't treat it that trivialist either. That's I disrespect you for making that statement, sir. Madam or it. Labour have turned full circle after being nuclear skeptics for much of the last 40 years, are now firmly in the nuclear lobby. Nuclear lobby with Boris. And lobbying was illegal under the charters. It became legal because of an amendment to the slavery laws. There was an illegal amendment to the slavery laws. And Hugo, Chief Supreme Court Justice, American U.S. Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black, who's long since passed, obviously, in 1930s had wrote an eloquent dissent stating how absurd it was that an amendment meant to free slaves from an oppressive government was being used by corporations to oppress a solvent people. This is what he's referring to is corporate personhood, where corporations end up with certain human rights. But a corporation existed under a charter where they were held accountable. There was an incentive not to make a mistake because you can be arrested and your corporation could be liquidated to pay restitution, an outstanding debt. Instead, now it's a corporation. In other words, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook can't go to jail because they're a corporate personhood. They're on the stock market. He can get not him personally, but Facebook can get a fine. The shareholders can get a fine, but they can't arrest 1 million shareholders, which now they don't have an incentive not to be evil. And they demonstrated quite clearly what that happens when you have no incentive not to be evil. In 86, Dankers felt vindicated by the disaster at Chernobyl in Ukraine. A fire in the plant spread contamination, some of which ended up in Northumberland sheep. They closed 9,000 farms in Ireland, Scotland, and United Kingdom. You had to cross all of Europe to get there. So if it was so bad when it finally got 3,000 miles to United Kingdom, how bad was all the countries in between? Because you had to close 9,000 farms, which meant, and 400 are still closed today, 36 years later. But what that actually, Sweden closed the freshwater fishing for over 30 years because of Chernobyl. Latvia still can't eat the reindeer because they're so radioactive from eating the lichen, and the list keeps going. So in order to make 9,000 farms so radioactive that you have to close them, meant you contaminate your entire country and all of Europe, right? In fact, Europe changed the sex ratio of all males and females, more males to females in all of Europe. And you can't do that without doing the same to all the species, by the way. And you can't do that without poisoning everybody. Because that's how it works. You start eliminating the female population. So now there's more males being born on top of that. And they've known about this since the 40s and 50s for sure. An explosion at Europe's largest nuke plant would be Chernobyl's times 10. Yet Chernobyl was a 200-ton, mostly graphite reactors. These are significantly bigger reactors. They could radiate thousands of people, leave most of the southern Ukraine, much of the Balkans, uninhabitable for thousands of years. Well, like if you look at, it's not good for me to talk about it, is it? Hang on. Because despite what a lot of people think about what I do here, this is an educational program. And unfortunately, I got a bit of a personality that when I'm should be offended, I am, which makes me an abnormality apparently. Let me explain. Well, they say it's going to be infinitely bigger. If I can spell it right. Let me see what I can. Like it's the whole story is just absurd, isn't it? Ignore the last one for a second. I'll get to that. It just shows you the. Well, first I have to close 9,000 farms in Ireland and Scotland and United Kingdom, folks. Which is catastrophic. It means you can't drink the fresh water and everything else is contaminated. It wasn't just flying around looking for those farms. Early infant mortality in Germany. Why are you doing? These are all studies before and after Chernobyl. Defects on Chernobyl on induced abortions in Italy. Resuspensions, redistributions, radionuclides from forest fire in Chernobyl nuclear wasteland, which is obviously going to be applied to United Kingdom and all of Europe. Whenever they have forest fires, they're going to be liberating the sequestered elements back into the environment. And forest salt, impact on the Alp lakes in France. France. Who's the pro-nuclear idiots. Now half their fleet is down because the government built them, so you know they weren't going to last. Highly radioactive Chernobyl deposit in the Scandinavian glaciers. Thyroid cancers in children and young adults in the north of England. Blaming it on Chernobyl. You got to blame that on Sellafield and Donneray. Fallout disposition at Monaco. Thyroid cancers for children and adolescents, Belarus because of Chernobyl. New York following Chernobyl. And the acknowledged soil plant transfer of plutonium and americium in Belarus after Chernobyl. Impact on Western Europe and the coastal Syrian mountains. Bioaccumulation in marine mammals in the Baltic Sea because of Chernobyl. Resuspensions. Stratospheric distribution of radiation. Not just iodine and cesium. They can track iodine and cesium and find it. Then they're going to extrapolate uranium, plutonium, technetium. The list just keeps going. There's over 1,000 of them. Again, they not like Cumbria has a meltdown of its own called Windscale, where they changed the name to Sellafield to hide the fact they kidnapped people from theaters because nobody would volunteer to go in there. So they volunteered the back rows of the theaters. Back in those days, that's where all the poor people sat. Concentrations of radiocesium, Italian drum wheat. Ukraine's wheat is shipped to the most impoverished countries. Ukraine's an actual nuclear wasteland itself, right? It's one of the biggest food baskets for the impoverished countries. That should horrify you, folks. That should terrify everybody on the planet. That's evilness. That's 100% agenda. That's incredibly evilly done. The doses from Chernobyl to the Nordic population via diet intake. Does this sound like a localized accident to anybody? Environmental study of radioactive cesium in Greek lakes fish after Chernobyl. And plant drugs, because plants are used to make radiation. So they suck up radiation on top of that, or are used to make drugs rather, and they suck up radiation. Unbelievable. Easily. Then now you got radioactive chemotherapy. If you got a headache, you get chemo at your local supermarket from your pills, aspirins. Radioactivity sequestered in Lynchon in eastern Canada. Like, the list is so shocking when you start looking at it. Claiming that you can use potassium fertilizer to displace any isotopes in a farmer's field is ludicrous. So they're trying to imply there's only cesium, and don't worry, the potassium will displace it in the food and you can sell it. This is what they're doing, yeah? And this is batshit lunatic voodoo. This is not science, this is voodoo stuff. Making people complacent, the farmers complacent, by claiming potassium is going to get rid of the uranium and plutonium and americium and neptunium and strontium and everything else and all their daughters and 1,000 fission products. Influence of post-Chernobyl fallout, birth defects, abortion rates in Austria. Again, right, they're talking about Chernobyl fallout in freshwater lakes in Columbia, which is right alongside of a mixed oxide fuel meltdown in 1955 or 57, which is now called Sellafield, where they're storing fuel rods from all over UK, which are all still split in the atom, and they're surrounded by farmers' fields on top of that. Where when they had cancer clusters in children in Cumbria, they blamed it on the common flu. Leukemia in children, clusters, were blamed. It's academic studies that I've covered. Again, like food ingestion doses from Columbia, in Columbia 10 years post-Chernobyl, which is a couple of miles away from Sellafield. These are degenerates. This industry is nothing but degenerates. It's nothing but degenerates. The world's a much better place if it never had any of these creatures on it. Radiation doses in countries of the northern hemisphere from Chernobyl. Why are you doing studies on all of this? Fallout of Chernobyl in Ontario. So nuclear power plants in Ontario were then releasing radiation to the environment and blaming it on Chernobyl. The grazing economy in North Wales, 9,000 farms had to shut down because of radioactive fallout. Infant mortality after Chernobyl. Theft of Chernobyl's data. Well, you can extrapolate from just the stuff I showed you. This is not a game we're talking about. Chernobyl's very small compared to the plants in Ukraine, by the way. Look at all the people on that study. That's another thing. They all had to pay mortgages and everything else. Nuclear, for agricultural in Canada, they just covered it up. Poison everybody. So when Fukushima melted down, they decided to finish him off. Intellectual development, mental behavioral disorders in children exposed when their parents were pregnant after Chernobyl. Radioactivity in milk consumed in Nigeria 10 years after Chernobyl. Wait, you know why they're doing studies? Because these were events, right? Chernobyl victims are not mere objects of research. Inhalation of radionuclides during agricultural work. You're doing this, so instead of saying that they shouldn't be growing food there, they studied the people, the immigrants that were working in the fields for the doses they were getting from handling the radioactive food that they're going to ship to market. If that's not kooky as it gets, what is? If that doesn't show you how insidiously lunatic and evil the industry actually is, I'm confused. All of this, when you put it together, is a warning, folks. This is just a fraction of a percent of what I put up for this year's Chernobyl anniversary. I ran through 900 of these, and each one of them would make you just like go brain. The industry totally, completely, 100 billion % genocide, omnicide. Oh, man. Then you got kooks like this writing stories talking about Chernobyl surpasses any and all of the terrors in The Exorcist, The Shining, The Human Centipede put together. And what's more, it's real. These are 3 fictional movies, but Chernobyl surpassed all of the terrors in them. I showed you the terrors just in the studies. That's, if you can't extrapolate the facts from that, you just got to go back and watch it a couple of times. It'll resonate. It might seem like a strange moment to be boasting nuclear. Really? It was never fail-safe, as the originators rashly claimed in the 50s. It's not too cheap to meter. It's not carbon-free. There's always a risk from wars, natural disasters like Fukushima. That's not natural. They built it where they have 5,000 earthquakes a year and thousands a year history of huge tsunamis and terrorism. The fuel pools are terrorists, each and every one of them, aren't they? Japan is burning billions of tons of radiation incinerators across the country. Wake up, you're in real danger. Wake up. I don't appreciate people dragging people away from my site at all. I work really hard to do the things I'm doing, tell the story. And when people come here and suggest people go to another site, that's incredible disrespect to do that. International agencies, including Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is United Nations. Why is United Nations the arbiter when obviously they're not a good entity? They're like the world, they're the ultimate insult to the future of all species. Seems to think that occasional radioactive disasters is the price worth paying to reduce carbon emission the United Nations is talking about. Like Boris Johnson even suggests the current energy crisis could be solved by a rapid expansion of nukes. There's no such thing as a rapid expansion of nukes. You can't build a nuke plant in a decade. It takes 5 or 6 years just to survey the sites and get them to the point where you can start building. Once you start building, like he says here, it took 17 years to get Finland's site after 5 years of licensing and looking for the site, and there's $500 million just spent on looking at the site on different sites. Anyway, I can't keep going. Let's jump to the next story. German Greens deny report on a nuclear plant expansion. Well, there's this agenda been going on for over 11 years, right? Constantly, each day, multiple medias will attack. Almost half of the stories will attack Germany for saying no to nuclear. And this was immediate, right, when they announced it. This is stunning, where nuclear power plants, they're going to build a new one, Sizewell C. They're even showing you the picture, surrounded by farms, and I've never heard of protesters ask the question, why are you building it in farm countries? Because all of them are going to hemorrhage radiation for decades and decades into the farms, non-stop, all day, every day. Particularly once they fill up the fuel pools. It's still splitting the atom for decades. They don't have a repository, so they stuff the pools, see? We got a poll tonight that I forgot to mention. Should nuclear power plants be labeled crimes against humanity? That's crimes against humanity. Everybody who eats the food, and you're talking about a lot of people for many, many years being poisoned that way. The Geiger counter can only pick up gamma. It's not going to pick up alpha, betas, neutrons, or the X-rays caused by these bombardments. I think it's stunning. UK nuclear gamut faces long odds even with Sizewell approval. Hinkley Point C is over budget and behind schedule. Well, like they already want almost $30 billion and they haven't even started to build it. Imagine 4 or 5 years down the road, they're going to want another $10 billion. Can you imagine how expensive, if they actually get to build it, how expensive that's going to be? Oh, well, that's a lie. They're building it. They claim it's the biggest project in United Kingdom's history. They got to use, everything has to be triple inspected. Yeah, of course I mentioned Kevin. Kevin's been on the show a few times. For years, I used to run Kevin's link to Kevin's site and my description for quite a lot of years. Let's think about our future. Let's think about our kids and grandkids. The government in the UK wants to deliver 8 reactors this decade. The last plant the EDF built took 17 years. And it's still not up to full power, is it? And it's 4 times over budget. They don't have the manpower to start a new one each year. They ain't going to finish 8 reactors by 2030, like Boers, the moron, the traitor, the human mass murderer, who lifted all restrictions with the shake of a hand. I showed you that earlier, on food from a nuclear wasteland into a vulnerable country. And legally binding emission cuts from the 2015 Paris Accord. The Paris Accord was about promoting nuclear. But there was still no... In 2015, France didn't say we're going to build a bunch of new reactors. They only said that this year. They waited till most of the reactors are old and decrepit, and there's no way they can build the reactors in time to replace it. It's almost like they didn't expect the population to survive this long, isn't it? We see that symmetrical around the world too. And again, nobody will acknowledge storage solutions for renewables would end this misery, or the fact that between 2020 and 2026, we're going to have 4,800 gigawatts of renewables online, which is more than current gas, oil, and coal and nuclear combined on the planet. And the implications of, by 2026, being able to almost double that again in 1 year. Which makes all the only thing holding us back in the storage, and they're doing a great job of holding that back. If it wasn't for that, we would already easily replace the majority of the consumable energies on the planet. So they're thinking about building a containment around, thousands of sieverts, reactor cores that are melted down or detonated and lost their complete inventories into the environment. Some has, like Reactor 2, a lot of it burnt for days and days. There was multiple detonations too, by the way. And some of it, the majority of what was remaining after the big burn-off, has gone down into the earth and hit the water tables. And we know this because it's split in the ground. Geysers of steam have come out of the ground when they abandoned the site for extended periods, right? Lethal doses coming out of the ground in the form of steam, which is visible in certain conditions. So there's a bunch of stories about this on Friday, I think it was, where they're talking about building a containment, filling it up with water, really, and then they can use that for shielding to take the fuel out of the building, and that's not a bad idea, right? The bad idea is TEPCO is in charge. That's absurd. And they're not a decommissioning authority, or even close to it, or ever will be. The homeless might be, but TEPCO's not. When you really look at what they've done at Fukushima alone, how they just slaughtered the homeless, the destitute, the victims of society, immigrants who don't speak the language for over a decade, and I mean slaughtered them. It's not nuclear scientists or nuclear academics or nuclear companies or nuclear physicists or anybody else is there. It's not TEPCO. TEPCO's not actually there. It's horrifying that the planet didn't respond appropriately. Right? You can have no fate, zero. You have zero fate in the industry. This is nonsense, unfortunately. They're not going to enclose it. Reactor 3 is gone. Reactor 4 is gone, completely gone. Reactor 2 went. Now there's residual, but quantities. There's probably 100 tons in the infrastructure of the building that's sitting there, but the rest of it's gone. The fuel pools are gone in all of these buildings. On top of that, with decades of reactor cores, they claim they got the fuel pools of reactor 2 and 3. I've done so many presentations on this. It's a ludicrous assertion. With no proven track record in the nuclear field, It could require advanced technology to stop water leaking out. Were to go ahead, the process from building to actual debris removal would be lengthy. Like, you couldn't pull it off. The industry is way too stupid to pull something like that off. I'm not even going to entertain it unless they actually go and try it. It's a ludicrous. Like, it's a good idea in certain circumstances. Fukushima is not one of them, unfortunately. And the current monsters in charge, there's zero possibility that this is not a scam. It's a good idea, a theoretical idea for future meltdowns, but it's not applicable to Fukushima. What's interesting is they showed you this picture, and it's two parts basically. This was really interesting. What the hell am I looking at here? What are they doing with their plastic bags in their hands and paper suits on, lining up? Look at them, lining up. You can go in at one at a time and have a look, and then go over and see the guy with the tattoos. We're going to give you $50 each. Because when you dress homeless up in a paper suit, you can't tell the difference. Nuclear scientists are not going to go up to Medusa with paper suits on, despite the fact they're standing on steel sheets. And why wouldn't you walk across the open rather than go around it and get close to the structure? Why would you do that? Nothing surprised me, right? None of this makes sense. Right, they're carrying these plastic bags. I'll get out of the way here. You can see what I mean by that. This is not construction tools. This is their personal items or something they're carrying around in plastic bags. That doesn't make any sense to anybody. If you look at the guy with the black vest on, that's a titanium vest. That's a titanium vest. That's the remains of Reactor 3. Let me show you Reactor 3 so you can actually appreciate. That's the deception you're looking at right there. Just bear with me. I'll show you what Reactor 3 actually looks like. Who's texting me? This hour of the night. Which is fine. You can text me questions or whatever. I don't know, man. Okay, so when you zoom in on this stuff here, all you see is wreckage. I got a picture for you what Reactor 3 looks like in a second here. There we go. Just waiting for my system to catch up. Here's what it actually looks like. It used to be a 190-foot building. The reactors and the fuel pools were at the top of it. So they built this structure, a 170-foot structure. What they done was they built a wall around this building. And then they put the structure on top of it. It was built off site. The idea was to trick you into thinking they're inside the building. But when you zoom in on that, it's clear that there's no integrity to this building, right? There's nothing. You're not inside of that building. And wait for it. I'm going to show you what they claim it looks like inside. Here's another picture before they stripped it down to this. This is what it looked like directly after the accident. Sorry about that. Hang on. Wait for it. I almost found it. Why are you being so hard to get along with? There we are. Here we come. Here's what they claim it looks like. can't look like that because it looks like this. Preparatory lodging begins so they open up 15% of, we covered this last week, of Akuma, and the other 85% is too radioactive to cross the street and go to, which means you can't be in that community. This one is about Nami. Nami's quite a long ways away. Most of it is still under evacuation orders. Next spring, they're going to release evacuation orders for part of Nami. The industry's insane. There's not a triple meltdown, there's 4 meltdowns for sure, and 8 fuel pools that melted down. On Thursday, 4 people. 4 people. Four people. What are we doing here? Like, you can't just send me stuff and interrupt my stream. That's today, stop talking about it? What the hell are you talking about? I'm gonna have to block you if you send me any more of that. Stop talking about the tanks. On Thursday, 4 people participated in preparatory lodging program, I'm happy to be able to say. So you got a nuclear wasteland for 11 years, and you got 4 people gullible enough to go in there, and that's somehow evidence? The government doesn't live there. The head of TEPCO doesn't live there. You don't want to live there. Japanese government will buy liquid natural gas to avoid the energy crisis. Well, that's the price you got to pay for energy. People, you're not paying for it. People are paying you for the electricity. And you're making a profit off it. And thousands and thousands and thousands of people got a job that's paid for by the people who buy the electricity. If you got a problem, get out of the way. Somebody else will do it, I'm sure. Energy crunch pushes Japan to an era of uncharted coal power. Coal power is awesome. Just don't build it in your community. Coal power doesn't pulse energy for millions of years. You haven't got to abandon your communities when it breaks down. You don't got to spend $500 billion to try to clean it up for 100 years when it breaks down. Nuclear energy renaissance has arrived. Quill Robertson, Vice President of Government Affairs. So there's, like, the disconnect is real. They don't got the job to come up with a solution. They got the job to promote whatever the lobbyists tell them. That's you can't have a future with people like that in positions of authority. They said no one died from 3 Mile Island. This is ludicrous. There was 2 million people got irradiated. They admitted that, but they claimed it was a small dose. A single atom will make you sick in increments over your lifetime. Right? It sequesters your muscles, your organs, your bones, your body attacks it for the rest of your life with white blood cells. That displaces the red blood cells for the rest of your life. The red blood cells carry oxygen and nutrition. But you would have got thousands of these in your body. So your immune system is compromised long before cancer is manifested or diagnosed. But there was a lot of people. There was a mass die-off of pets, too, for goodness sakes, of the people who ran away, finally. The government came out with studies claiming it was like watching color television for an extra year. How are you going to have a conversation when somebody says something like that to you? All you can say is like, shut up, stupid. But there are actually people believe in that, right? And it's, you see, Chernobyl, there was dozens of lives lost. And they closed 9,000 farms in Ireland and Scotland, United Kingdom. But there's only a couple of dozen lives lost, was it? They conscripted almost 700,000 people they admit to. Who went out, a lot of these only went on the roof for like 25 or 30 seconds and then went home and got sick and got a pension because they were sick for the rest of their life. There's 3 million children with permanent disabilities because of Chernobyl. Changed the sex ratio of all males and females in Europe to more males to more females. That can't do that without doing the same to all the species. The claim to tell the lies, these lies, is that's how the industry survived. Completed, right? Their entire legacy is based upon deceit and deception. Bringing experts from around the world to contain the meltdown in Fukushima. There's no external experts went to Fukushima. Not one. Zero. It was the homeless, the destitute, the victims of society, immigrants who don't speak the language. It should have been you. You should have been sacrificed, not them. They're 1,000 times better person you could ever be. There should be a law where people like that has to do 50 years in jail, hard labor. They're murderers by spreading this deceit and deception. It's hideously erroneous that people like that are not held accountable. See, because there's no checks and balances to hold them accountable. It's like, it's really, to say something like that, I don't understand. I don't understand why you hate everybody so much. I don't understand why you're so fucking dark. I don't, right? So you think experts from all over the world went in there, do you? First off, they couldn't even get close to it with helicopters. Workers on site do not consent to join the battle. Does that sound like experts all over the world to you? High radiation forces withdrawal of workers trying to restore power. You can't restore power to a site where the guts are ripped out of everything for 680 kilometers. Here's your experts. It's time to make a geezer suicide squad. So growing old now is a crime. TEPCO admits it's going to run out of experts in 5 years. No, homeless. Tokyo Vice Governor suggested a Fukushima draft. Does that sound like experts to anybody? 60 and older should be prepared to die at the Fukushimas. Does that sound like experts to somebody? Anybody?
Another example, immediately after the first hydrogen explosion, TEPCO gave out an order a request to all of these labor dispatching companies, and they said, send us people who don't mind dying.
Send us people who don't mind dying. Homeless people are being sold to companies and working on Fukushima. The homeless are taken to work at Fukushima. That's your heroes. The homeless, the destitute, the victims of society, the mentally handicapped, and they're given second-hand paper suits. The unskilled and the destitute are the hiring targets, not the experts. People carry out a conversation. That's who they asked to go into the nuclear meltdown. They're not given no food. They're treated with violence, and then when they get sick, they're rejected and disposed of like paper towels. TEPCO raised the safe limit 500 times. Do you think the experts are running in there, folks? The experts wanted to escape but feared they might hurt me. No, the homeless. They can't even read. The mentally disabled are working there. They're treated like disposable people. They're tricked into being at the nuke plant. They're underage. They're treated like kamikazes. They were threatened. The seniors are sought. For frontline radiation cleanup in Japan, the seniors. Well, how much are we going to get censored tonight's show, I wonder? So tomorrow's a holiday, Labor Day. I'm completely distraught that I'm not on the ocean yet. It's just as well that the park didn't show up. And it won't show up tomorrow because everything's closed, which is Monday. If I'm lucky, it's going to show up Tuesday, am I? Everything we ordered from Amazon, we needed right away. It was late by forever. It showed up eventually, but it was late forever, isn't it? And there's nothing I can do about it. The weather is, I'm not sure what the weather is doing now. It looks like summer is over yesterday and today. We'll see. We still got bird die-offs going here. It's not that far from me, all things considered. And so when we get that piece, we're going to head over there. We're going to do what we can anyway. I mean, still got to get kinks out of this before I can trust it to go out on the open ocean, because we're at the open ocean. And so you need a few days of just not taking chances, right? And we already, missed the big die-off, and I had a kidney stone, so I couldn't really travel anyway. But the kidney stone has passed, according to the last CAT scan. And we're ready to take off and start researching. I am anyway. I'd like to go across the province too, but we got to get out on the ocean and do a count. And so it's going to be at this all fall by the looks of it. Once we get everything in second gear, we'll be going for the next couple of months on research expeditions by the looks of it. If we can fund it, and right now we got enough to get going and do pretty good. So James donated another 100, and let me get the number just so I don't make an insult. I think it was 160 or 180. I haven't got it there for some reason tonight. On Thursday, which means we got enough to fuel up the whole system, man. Which can carry us quite a lot. And enough for launch fees for a while. But we still got to raise money. But we're off to a good start, right? So I've done all kinds of basic stuff over the weekend, but I found that I was drained. My whole system was drained, like personally, because we don't take days off, right? And what we do here it's hardcore. What we do is cover the news cycle on nuclear, and we cover all things Fukushima, of course. But the news cycle, what we're seeing is just so much propaganda, but the same kind of propaganda, no matter where it's from on the planet. We're seeing this coordinated attack upon everybody, on humanity. So we got to close that poll down, I guess. And we've done pretty good. Notice my last video, I said at the beginning of the show that I was showing you. Huge censorship, eh? But there's nothing we can do about it. We got to keep working. We got 94% of the votes says nuclear power plants should be labeled crimes against humanity. That's the appropriate response, by the way. But it looks like you're not going to get to share me by liking my video. So consider playlists. If you start up another channel, even subsidy channel, start making playlists of this stuff, that'll get indexed, right? And people can find the video. But as we're seeing the last number of videos in a 24-hour cycle, I'm lucky to get 4 or 5 thumbs up, no matter how many views I get. And thumbs up is how you typically share the videos, see? So they censored. There's a huge amount of that done to me over the years. It's such a coward thing. That's the nuclear industry. That's the way of the nuclear industry. Their personalities are cowards. And that's how they get the job, right? They seem to be the best employed for nuclear industry as cowards. And puppy rapists and stuff like that. So we're going to end the poll on 94%, which is fantastic. I'm going to do a shout out, I guess. Let me turn this down. Who we got here? We got Thinker, Don Vincent, Colette, hi Colette, Darren N. Yeah, what time is it we're on to? 12:20 p.m. my time, midnight, 20 minutes after midnight. Thinker, I said hi. Hi everybody. Dana Nasana, hi Dana. Darlene. James Lucet, again, thank you, James, my friend. You're so awesome. Thank goodness you've done the things you've done. And Edward, Leslie. Good night, everybody. Have a great night. Great day tomorrow. I guess, is tomorrow a holiday in America? I'm just, H. Thomas Ackerman. Hi, Thomas. Thomas is a fantastic artist and blogger, by the way, on Fukushima. He's been around for a decade. And Thomas is also an amazing real-life artist. These are very expensive paintings to buy his paintings, folks. But he's a thinker, too, right? He's a great blogger on Fukushima over the years. He's a good friend of this planet. Stephen Young, who's a great friend too, by the way. I hope you're doing better, Stephen. I know you're probably not, but I hope you're doing better. Another Gmail. Warms the heart to see all you folks. It's a good way to switch off for me, even though I can't switch off. It does help me slow down at the end of the show. Quick shout out. Susie, to anyone, you're welcome. Cruising up through. Richard, Peaceware, we're almost through the names. I'll come down to the most recent ones in a moment here. Philip Wan, John Curtis, Bob, and everybody that I missed. My apologies if I missed anybody. Chad. There we go. We'll call it a night. If you made it this far, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. It might not show up by the looks of it. But make a playlist. Make an email list. Or do something. Send me out to random people on YouTube. Get this information out there. The world's got to come and fight for the future. Okay, we'll see everybody on the next show. I'm not 100% sure I'm doing a show tomorrow night. Tomorrow's a holiday. Might go visit family tomorrow. Might do nothing and sleep all day. Who knows? It's hard for me not to do a show because I've been doing this for so many years, and every 24 hours there's so many nuclear scumbags. It's so much work, though, each time. But who knows? It's hard for me not to, so all I can do is check, I guess. Good night, everybody. Have a great night. Great day tomorrow. And we'll see everybody on the next show. Hopefully the part shows up on Tuesday so we can get on with it. Looking forward to it. Hugs for everybody. Take care, folks. Thanks, Dale. Yeah, we'll call it a night. See everybody tomorrow night, I guess. Take care, folks.